So welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to be hosting Gary BarkHuizen. Thank you so very much for joining us, Gary. And before his talk, we're going to hear Pilar Martinez. She's going to summarize this week of classroom-based research electronic village online session. Over to you, Pilar.
Oh, hello everyone. How are you? Some pleasure to be here with all of you. Well, this week we're going to focus especially on analyzing and interpreting data, and we will be discussing questions like how is the data analyzed and presented, and how could that data analysis and data presentation of the study you chose guide your own classroom-based research. The main activity this week centers on your own data analysis and how will you analyze, how are you analyzing the data you collected or might collect in the future. The keynote speaker for this week is Gary BarkHuizen, and we feel really honored and very much grateful to have him here. So it's some pleasure.
Thank you.
The title of the webinar is How Does Doing and Sharing Research Change Who You Are and What You Do? So thank you so much for being here, and special thanks to Gary. Over to you, Mariana. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you very much for your nice introduction and your summary of the activities this week. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so it is with special excitement that I am pleased to welcome Gary to our fourth EVO talk in series. It was lovely meeting Gary at Istanbul Teachers Research Conference in 2018, and today he is here with all of us. Gary is Professor of Applied Linguistics at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. His teaching and research interests are in the areas of teacher education, language teacher and learner identity, study abroad, and narrative inquiry. He has published widely in these areas, including in many different journals. His recent books include Reflections on Language Teacher Identity Research, 2017, in Qualitative Research Topics in Language Teacher Education, 2019, Routledge. His latest book is Communicating Identities, 2020, with Patty Strauss. He is currently editing a book on the psychological experiences of language teachers who study abroad. So thank you very much, Gary, for joining us today. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the welcome. I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you, and I'm really honored that you invited me to take part in this fantastic program. I've spent a bit of time on Canvas having a look at the program, and it really is filled with so much good content, and I can see that the engagement has been really quite inspirational in some way. So it's been it is still a fantastic program with a couple more weeks to go, I think. So it's really a great privilege to be a part of it. So once again, thank you for that welcome, Mariana. And thank you also for the invitation to be just a small part of it. I am aware of the other guest lectures that have taken place, and in fact, I've watched all of them. So when I was preparing for today, I don't want to repeat what has come before. So I was quite selective in what I'm going to be talking about today. I also just very recently I didn't take part, but I was observing an online discussion of the IETFL research thing, which was on teacher researchers engaging with research, or on language teachers engaging with research, particularly through the reading activities that they do. And that was really interesting for me preparing this talk, because it got me thinking in all different ways about how language teachers actually do research, what we mean by research, what we mean by teachers, what we mean by language teachers, what we mean by researchers. There was a lot of discussion that took place, sometimes quite off topic, but in a very healthy and productive way as well. So I'd like to start by sharing my screen. So let's hope we get this right. So just to give you an overview of what I'm planning to do today. Let's see how this goes. Are you able? Do you see the big blue screen?
Yes.
You see the big blue screen. Excellent. Okay.
Yes,
so,
perfect.
Right. Thanks, Mariana. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today. That's my topic. Just a few opening remarks about teacher research. And this has been extensively covered in the program so far, and also in the talks that have happened. So I'm not going to get into repeating what teacher research is, conceptions of research, what do we mean by language teacher researchers, and so on. That's been extensively covered. But I want just a couple of opening remarks that have been sort of stimulated, I guess, particularly through the previous guest lectures, and also by that IETFL Research SIG online discussion. I then want to present a study that I carried out in Colombia, and it's good to see some Colombians here, that was looking at the professional identity development of a group of experienced language teachers who are enrolled in a PhD program. And their experiences are really relevant to ideas of becoming a researcher, and how through becoming a researcher, it changes who we are, particularly our desires for research, and how we are motivated to do research, and how we imagine ourselves as researchers. So I'll present you just a few selected findings from that study. And then I'll focus particularly on one of the participants of the study, just to explore a little bit more some of the themes that came through. And I'll look at some of the identity dilemmas that she faced as a researcher. And those identity dilemmas were placed somewhere between her experiences of taking part in meaningful research, meaningful to her, and research which she perceived to be meaningless or not so meaningful in her life as a language teacher. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then right at the end, depending on how much time we got, I'd like to talk a little bit about reflecting on our identities as part of our practice as language teachers, and how reflecting on our identities as language teachers may result in some ideas for further teacher research. So I'll show you some reflective activities from that recent book that Mariana mentioned. Okay, so firstly, what I want to do is just to, what I said I'm not going to do is go over all the material about who teacher researchers are and so on. So just very, very quickly to set the scene, when we talk about teacher researchers, what I'm talking about are teacher researchers from a whole range of contexts. So teacher researchers in public, secondary and primary schools, in higher education such as universities, in private language institutes, in community language schools, and other types of settings as well. So by teacher researchers, there are a range of possibilities of who language teachers are and how they engage with and in research. So it's very important that that I'm not talking about one particular type of research of language teacher researcher. And this came up particularly in that that researching online discussion. So while I'm presenting, just think about, who are you? Think about, from your own perspective, who are you as a language teacher researcher? If you are not engaged in research at the moment, who would you like to be as a language teacher researcher? I think many of you are, because you are involved in professional development program and you are thinking about and working on ideas about research, so you'll be able to answer this question. So my point is, in what I'm presenting today, is to keep thinking about this question: who am I? So who are you as a language teacher and as a potential or an active language teacher researcher? Where are these teacher researchers? It very broadly in the global north, in the global south. This has come up again. There are differences depending on where one is located. In rural and urban settings, for example, in well-resourced institutions and schools, and in institutions and schools that can be described as experiencing difficult circumstances or perhaps under-resourced or disadvantaged. So again, there are these different environments or contexts in which language teachers and potential or active teacher researchers operate. So where are you? So once again, in what I present today, keep relating it to who you are. What I'm trying to do is to get you to think about who you are in this language teacher research endeavor, rather than who other people are from some theory or from some study or from someone else's research. Try and locate yourself in the middle of this discussion. What type of research are we talking about? Action research. In the discussion, that online discussion, what came up was an idea of, some people think of research as SOA research. In other words, it's sort of hardcore academic research, SOA research. Well, some of you may be doing that. And in fact, one of my PhD students, who I'll refer to later, has just completed a thesis on college English teachers in China. And she looked at 2 institutions and the research communities within the college English teaching departments at these institutions, and found that, there were different conceptions of what research was amongst these groups of college English teachers. And for some of them, it was very much SOA research. Research which will enable them to get promoted, research which will enable them to get tenure, and so on. But of course, when we talk about researchers, language teacher researchers, we will talk about not only action research, exploratory practice, exploratory action research, narrative inquiry, and then using a whole range of qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. So what do you do? Once again, place yourself in the middle of this discussion. What do you do? And then finally, just in these opening comments, research motivation. What gets you to do research? Is it part of a qualification? So many of us do research as part of an undergraduate qualification, more so when doing a master's or a PhD. There are certain research requirements in our teacher education, in our formal teacher education, that gets us to do research. Sometimes it stops there and we never do research again, but sometimes we do continue, of course, to do research as part of institutional contractual obligations. So we get a job which says you have to do research for a certain percentage of your time. Sometimes we do research on our own accord. And this is what a lot of you involved in the program do. And also as part of a community of practice. In some schools, sometimes a group of teachers get together and decide, let's get together and do some research, some collaborative action research, or whatever the case may be. So what is your motivation? What research do you do? Who are you as a researcher, and what gets you to do research? So just the final time I'm saying is, in the discussion that takes place today, in my presentation, keep saying, how does this relate to me? Where do I fit in with how I see myself, my identity as a language teacher researcher? In a webinar of a few days ago, Kenan DeKalita spoke about transforming teaching through research. My focus today is going to be more on transforming teachers through research. So the focus will be on teachers, particularly teachers' identities and how they change, or how they are reshaped, or how they are molded, or however we want to describe it, through the activity relating to research. And some of this was covered by Emily Edwards in her EVO webinar just of a week or so ago, in which she asked the question, not only in her presentation, but also in this very good article that was recently published: in what ways do teachers develop or transform from conducting action research? In what ways do teachers develop or transform? And she presented a number of slides in which she listed some general professional development, some teaching-related professional development, some research-related development, and also some broader benefits. I just selected a few of these because these relate to some of the topics I'm going to be talking about today. So you can just have a look at these. But for the first one, some general professional development, there she talks about new teacher researcher identities. So explicitly talks about identities. Some renewed enthusiasm or motivation for teaching research. This I'm going to bring up again today. And also self-efficacy beliefs, how teachers see themselves and their efficacy, their ability as teachers. Teaching-related development, Kenan spoke a lot about this, the development of teaching practice and enhanced confidence about teaching, relating to our emotions, our feelings about teaching, and these broader benefits, which are really interesting, because when we become engaged in research, it often has an influence on our colleagues, on our learners, on the people we are teaching, but also our colleagues in the institution. She talks about collaboration and development of communities of practice. So sometimes a community of practice of researchers develops within our institutions, but even more broadly across institutions. Emily also mentioned that some of the broader benefits refers to institutional recognition of achievement. So there's some reward that we gain through doing research, through some recognition. I would say that even beyond the institution. So in a webinar like this, or in a program that you are involved in, we are meeting colleagues from outside of our institutions, and we get to know each other, and we learn about the research that we are doing. And so there's this recognition of us being language teachers who are engaged in research and are part of a professional community. This idea of community is something that both Emily and Kenan have stressed a lot in their presentations. So these are some of the points that I'm going to be getting on with today, particularly in the study that I'm going to be telling you about. So this is a study that I've carried out for a number of years and have been recently writing about it. And it was conducted at a university in Bogota, at a public university, as part of a PhD program with an English language teaching specialization. And it focused on a cohort of 7 participants. And what I mean by cohort is that they started the program at the same time and are working through the PhD program together. Now, these PhD students are very experienced English teachers. And some, in fact, they've all been involved to some extent in teacher education. So they have been working as teacher educators as well. And I've described them here as early career researchers, and I've done that deliberately, mainly from the perspective of institutional type research. They have done research as part of their undergrad and their master's programs, and some of them have also been engaged in research, in action research projects, and even in supervising action research projects in their teacher education role. So they have been involved in research through their qualifications or through the work that they do. But in terms of institutional research or academic research, which many of them aspire to do in some form, I guess they're early career researchers with limited or no publications, for example. So why did I get involved in this research project? My aim of the research was to investigate the negotiation of their language teacher or language teacher educator identities in the PhD program, paying particular attention to their emotions of in relation to their identity, and also their researcher identity, because obviously doing research as part of a PhD is a major part of the of study. So they all saw themselves going into this PhD study as professional development, as further professional development, but also they were aware that they were going to be doing research, a major research project. When I started the data collection and analyzing the data, which I'll tell you about in a minute, I found that my aim also started moving towards looking at their moral stance. As they became involved in the program, as they became involved in doing research, they were constantly aware of what was happening in education, what was happening in research, what was right and what was wrong about it. And this was reflected in the stories that they were telling me during the interviews, for example. And another interesting aspect that I won't be talking about, but just to fill in the picture, was that they soon started developing a sort of collective identity as a group of teachers and teacher researchers within this PhD program. So that was also really interesting to look at. So a group of researchers working together within a formal qualification developed an interesting sort of collective identity, which has interesting implications for their own practice. But as I said, that's not my focus today. My approach to doing the research was one of narrative inquiry, which is my favorite way of doing research. And I'm not getting into this, except to say that central to narrative inquiry are the stories that narrators tell about their life experiences. So when I went into doing this research, I was really interested in the stories that these participants were telling me about their identity experiences, about their research experiences as part of this PhD program. And it consisted of 2 narrative interviews, which I conducted with each of the participants, one each about an hour long. The first one focused on their personal biography, their PhD journey, and also their goals for the future post-PhD. So I wanted to find out a bit about who they were, why they were doing the PhD, and how they imagined themselves in the future after the PhD. And I was particularly, don't forget, the aim of the study was looking at their identity development, the changes in their identity as language teacher researchers. And then I did a second interview, which was 4 months later, where I addressed some of the common themes that came up from the analysis of the first interview. So I looked at these common themes and asked them specifically in interviews about these common themes in the second interview. Okay, so now I'm going to get straight into looking at one of the short stories. This is just an excerpt of a longer short story. What I did from the interviews was I extracted what I call short stories. And this was a short story by Anna, an experienced language teacher, and has been involved in teacher education as well. And this is an extract. It goes on much longer, but we don't have time to talk about all of it. This is a short extract from a short story, but it gives you an important message about research. And I'd like just to read it for you. While I'm reading it, just focus on the words in red, okay? So just again, Anna, a very experienced language teacher. She's taught in other countries. She's taught for many years in different institutions and so on. So she's lots and lots of teaching experience. She's done action research. She's done research in her own qualifications. She's supervised some action research. So she's very experienced professional. So what happened at the start of the story was that some jobs were advertised. A particular job was advertised at a university, and she applied for this full-time university job, which is what she aspires to. She wants to get a full-time university job. And she applied. So she says, well, they open some posts, and I would apply for it. But then they said that I was not prepared. I mean, I was not prepared because I didn't have research, because I didn't have this and that, because your only piece of research is the one that you did for your master's degree. And I was like, oh, so I'm not enough? What I have done is not enough? And so I said, oh, so I was thinking, maybe I should study a PhD, because like having a master's will never be enough if I want to work in a full-time position in a university. Okay, so just have a look at the red words. There's set up a sort of conflict here, a contrast between they, the people who advertised the position at the university, and I, who's Anna, the narrator of the story, in line 3, but they said I was not prepared. In line 4, I was not prepared. Line 5, I didn't. In line 6, your only piece of research you did for your. So it's very much a us and a them. Your and us. Okay. All right. So what is going on here? I mean, and then right at the end, she says, what I wanted was a full-time position. And this is what she wants. But what's stopping her from getting it is this I and them, that conflict that's going on with the main characters in this story. So when I started looking at this, it seemed like she was explaining to me her reasons for why she wanted to do this further study, this continuing professional development, this further in-service teacher education, this further research that she was going to be doing as part of her PhD. And it seemed that there was a connection between her reasons for wanting to do this further study and further research as part of her qualification and her identity. There seemed to be this connection between the reasons and how she saw herself. I'm not good enough, who I am, who they think I am. So there's a reflexive identity, her own way of seeing herself as a professional and as a teacher, but also they are ascribing an identity to her, the people who represent that university. They are ascribing to her an identity of someone who is a non-researcher, even though she has done research as part of her qualifications and as part of her professional life, working with teachers and doing her own action research. So there's a connection, definitely, between the reasons for wanting to do her PhD, her goal, and also her identity, how she sees herself as a researcher and how they, the others, see her as a researcher. And there seems to be, for me, a connection between the reasons and identity and Bonnie Norton's concept of investment. She's investing in this professional development, making a commitment. When you invest in something, you want to get something out of it. So what she decided to do was to invest in this further study, which is a major commitment. This is taking on a full, PhD study is not a small thing. There's a lot of research to be done. There's a lot of work to be done, courses to do. So she wants to invest in that in order to yield something, in order to get something back. And that getting something back ultimately would be a full-time job in a university. Okay, so there's this connection between the reasons for wanting to do the study and the research and her identity. And it seems that part of it seems to be this investment, a commitment to a desire to, because, her own agency, wanting to get involved in that new activity. So if we now, this is the same story, but just have a look at the green here. She's got, well, they opened up some posts. Okay, this is the advertised position, but she is not prepared. So there's something lacking according to the they. There's something lacking, and what it is I didn't have research. So there's some gap. There's some gap according to Anna that needs to be filled. She didn't have this and that. That needs to be taken care of. didn't have this and that. Yes, she had a piece of research, right, which she did in her master's, but not enough. So something needs to be developed. Her research needs to be developed, according to Anna. She says, not only does the research need to be developed, but I'm not enough. I also need to be developed. I, as a professional, I, as a person, need to be developed. All right, so we've got this gap according to the green points here. There are some posts, but those posts are not yet for me because there's a gap, there's something that needs to be done and I need to do it. I'm not prepared. I don't have research and I'm not enough. Even though she has all this experience as a language teacher and has quite considerable research experience as part of her master's and also within her professional life. So the answer to her is to study a PhD in order to achieve her goal right at the bottom, to get a full-time position in a university. So filling this gap seems to be like some sort of development that needs to take place, some aspect of development. So I'll put this arrow. Look, this is just a diagram. This is not some definitive theory. This is just a developing diagram, thinking about making sense of this data. So here we've got this arrow moving through the other diagram, the other circles, reasons, investment, identity, some development is what Anna perceives needs to take place. And the type of development perhaps could be labeled as research-focused development. So REFD, it's a little abbreviation, research-focused development. All right, she needs to develop not only the ability to do research, but what she's already developing in the story is how research counts, how the right type of research according to them, according to the university, counts. It'll get her the job. All right, so she's developing awareness not only of how she will need to do research, but also what that research actually means. Okay, and then the other type of development is a personal related development. She, I'm not enough. She also then needs to develop in some way. So perhaps if we're going back to this diagram, the two types of development then could be the research-focused development and the personal-focused development, going through the diagram of reasons and identity. There are reasons for embarking upon this study, where they're going to be active in professional development, active in substantial research. All right. So I just want to show you one other short story just to introduce a couple more types of development. Of course, there were 7 participants. I'm not going to go through all of them, although their stories are all very different. But this is just another excerpt from a small story just to illustrate some more of the types of development that take place, the types of identity developments that take place. So this is Alex. He says, well, I started to look for a PhD after 3 years working at the master's program. So he's been teaching in the master's program. Now remember the red are the people, the characters in the story, and the green represents the gap or the development that he perceives needs to happen. All right, so just focus on those. I will come back to them at the end. So he says, I started to look for a PhD after 3 years working at the master's program. After 3 years, 6 semesters, 6 different groups of teachers. So he's a teacher educator working with language teachers. These are pre-service language teachers. He's also a language teacher at the same time, very experienced language teachers. I realized something there. And is that in my curriculum, in my module of curriculum design. So he teaches a module of curriculum design. He says the teachers didn't have either epistemological instances or pedagogical instances towards teaching or learning yet. So what he's saying here is that in the curriculum design course, the teachers he works with don't have an in-depth knowledge of curriculum. They just have a sort of surface knowledge of what curriculum is. He says in line 8, because the focus of the module that I give isn't that, what is curriculum, but what is curriculum from an epistemological position and pedagogical position. I realized that, and so I started to look for PhDs. So what he's saying in the story is that when he teaches his module of curriculum design, he teaches it just, what is curriculum, but he doesn't dig deeply enough into, what are the epistemological positions related to curriculum? What are the pedagogical positions related to curriculum? He just teaches perhaps some definitions very on the surface related to curriculum. So he's realized now that there's a gap here in his own knowledge, perhaps about curriculum, or ways to go about teaching about curriculum. So he said, I better start looking for a PhD so I can go and do some research in this area and learn more about this. So if you look now at the red, he's got, I started groups of teachers. So here we've got him as the narrator, as the teacher educator, and the other characters in the story are his pre-service teachers. He says in line 3, I realized, line 4, my curriculum, line 5, the teachers didn't. So here the two sets of characters in the story are himself as the teacher, as the professional, as the teacher educator, and his pre-service teachers, his students that he's working with. Okay, so those are the main characters. He focused in his learning, in his future learning, is on his pre-service teachers. And if you look at the green to have a look at the gaps, he's saying, it's about his module of curriculum design. And my module of curriculum design in my master's, there's something lacking. There's some gap in the way I'm teaching it. So what I need to do then is to go and do a PhD so I can then fill that gap by doing research and further study in this area. So in Alex's story, and I'm just lumping all these together, 3 further types of development. One is a practice-focused development. So here he's referring to his practice of teaching curriculum. And the second is a student-teacher focused development, where his development is focused on his student teachers, and also an academic focus. He's interested in learning more theoretical work about curriculum through his research, right? Through his future imagined research that he hopes to be doing as part of his PhD. More theoretical work about curriculum related to epistemology, pedagogy, and so on. So these are 3 further types of development: practice-related development, student-teacher-focused development, and academic-focused development. So I've summarized them here for you. I want to just quickly go through them, because these types of development also relate to, I think, the outcomes, the identity outcomes of being involved in research. So there are professional developments, yes, but they're also identity developments as part of being involved, in this case, in the PhD program. But a huge part of that program is doing research in these areas that the participants are interested in. So personal focused development, this includes the personal growth and development of new skills and knowledge. So it's related to oneself as a professional person, the actual person, right? Academic focused development, this enhanced focus and competences that have to do with the more theoretical aspects of teacher education. Practice focused development relates to practice as a teacher and a teacher educator. So what we do in our work, in our practice as teacher educators. Research focused development relates to both research competence, how to do research, and also how to use that competence to fulfill professional goals. So if you think about Anna, she's thinking, I need to do more research in order to achieve my professional goals. And she's very aware of that. She's quite strategic in why she's doing this PhD. Okay. And then also student-teacher focused development for teacher educators, those who go on to do a PhD. It often is. This is often quite a big goal, to learn more about work that will contribute to the professional development or the teacher training of your student teachers. So just to get back to my lovely diagram, here you can see we've got the reasons to embark on PhD study, including the research that's going to be a part of that study, and investing in it, a commitment to it, and hoping to get something back from that. An investment not only in the work you do, but also an investment in our identities. That's what Norton always says. An investment in learning, an investment in professional development is also an investment in identity, because we are going to change who we are as a part of being involved in that activity that we have invested in. And those are the different types of investment. So what's your development? Think about yourself. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds while I have a sip of water, just to reflect quietly, just to think quietly about those 5 developments. Do any of them relate to you? Your activity in research, what you do in research. Is it, what are your reasons? What gap are you filling? How does it relate to your identity development? How are you being changed through the program that you are involved in, this 4, 5, 6 week program? How is it changing you? So think about the 5 developments that I just spoke about in relation to my study. And think if any of these apply to you, or are there others? So I'll give you just 30 seconds, just quietly, just to reflect on those. Oh my goodness, that was very quiet. Well done, everybody. Nice silent time. Okay, I'll go on for a few more minutes and then we can stop for questions. I want to just go back to a little bit to share another story from Anna's experience, just to talk a little bit more about her identity dilemma that she's experiencing. Now, remember, Anna was the language teacher who was aspiring to a job, in a full-time job in a university, and she didn't get that job because she didn't have enough research. She, in her interview and reflecting on her life as a PhD student and the research that she was doing, reflected a little bit more about research. So I'm going to just share another story from Anna, and I will just comment along the way. So she says, but I would love to carry out research, but what I don't like is the system in which the research should be like this and like that. So she's very keen to do research. She likes doing research, but it's the system in which research is often done that she's against. That the system prescribes ways in which research should be done, like this and like that, line 4. And you have to publish every year, every 2 years. I think is wild, showing her emotions here. She said, it's crazy that you have to publish this every year, every 2 years. It's like you have to produce a lot of research to show it's like I'm doing this research. So that is an interesting statement. She says that when the system prescribes how much research you do, it's often you do it just to show the system that yes, I'm doing this research, that I am doing research. You are accountable to the system, is the comment that she is making. Line 8, so why should you be doing that? Yeah. Line 9, like, no, I want to do research to impact the local community, to impact the teachers. So here she states her moral stance, I guess, on what type of research she wants to do. Research that has relevance, that impacts her local community, the teachers that she is working with or will work with, all right? Not with the pressure, line 11, not with the pressure of publishing and showing off. She talks about doing research to show off because I've done research, I've published twice a year. I can now show off, I can say to my system, to my institution that I've done my research. I can tick that box. I can measure my research success and show you that I have done it. I mean, nobody problematizes that, she says. No one says that is an issue. Like, is publishing for the sake of publishing? And I think this is what the system is doing. So she has some quite interesting, quite confrontational ideas about the system and the way it operates. Like the teachers should get publications very frequently. Otherwise, they are not like respected scholars. Is that okay? So she questions it. If no one else problematizes it, well, she will. She is questioning that we get measured, and if we fulfill those measurements, if we are required to do something and we meet those requirements, then that's respected scholar. But she sets up a contrast with, what about the research that I really want to do? She said, and sometimes I see the education like going around just publishing for having respect. And that scares me, she says. Now, remember, she wants to get a full-time job in a university where she will be required to do this type of research that she is so against at the moment. And that scares her. She sees her identity in an institutional setting where she can already imagine the conflicts that she's going to experience in that life as an academic. Because, and so, yeah, does that scare you? Yes, because I'm scared of doing a research for the sake of the publication, not because you want to improve a situation or because you want to understand a practice better. So she reflects what a lot of you have been talking about in your course and what the other presentations have been about so far when talking about teacher research, to improve a situation, to understand our practice better. She's got a much better understanding and a much better alignment with teacher research that in the way we've been talking about it so far in this course, as opposed to academic research. And I talk a bit more about Anna in this article that was published last year. And I reflect her stories, her narratives in this diagram, just mainly from her perspective, but perhaps think about your own position. Does any of this resonate with you? So here's her identity dilemma. And when you have a dilemma, it's, there are options, 2 or more options. And which option do you take? What do you agree with? What stance do you take? In this particular stage of her career, based on her past experiences and her desires and how she imagines her future and the moral stance she takes with regard to research. So she faces this dilemma. And on the one hand, now please note in this diagram, I've put these double-headed arrows here because these are dimensions, a continuum. It's not either or. This is a continuum. So on the one side, on the left-hand side, we've got the more sort of academic institutional research, which fits in with the sort of neoliberal system that Anna is talking about, the system where there's high accountability, where one needs to maintain standards and constant measurement of the type of research that one does, the frequency of publications and the quantity, how many and when and how often. And for Anna, that type of research is pretty meaningless. It's something that she's scared of. It's something that does not align with her identity as a researcher. And then towards the other end of this continuum, we have what perhaps we've been calling teacher research, where the characteristics are being embedded in a teacher education program, possibly, where she would desire to teach with teachers, student teachers, as part of a local community. She spoke about local community, where the impact, the research she does and possible publications and sharing of her research would be to understand practice and improve practice. And this type of research for her, to align with her identity, is much more meaningful to her. It relates much more to how Anna sees herself in her identity as a researcher. I was going to, I'll leave that. I'd like to just end now by referring to this book, which I published with my colleague Pat Strath last year. It's a book which focuses on communicating identities, and it's focused on learners, language learner identities. But why I thought I'd show it to you is I got the idea because of one of Kennan's comments about building a community for everybody in doing teacher research. So it's not just the teacher doing research, but teacher doing research with colleagues and also with the learners. And it got me thinking about this book, which the core of the book actually has a number of activities, communicative language learning activities for language learners, which focus on identity, where they get to talk about identity, reflect on identity, work with identity while doing communicative language teaching identities, focusing on various skills in the classroom. But each activity, although it's focused on learner identity, ends with a teacher reflection in which the teacher reflects on his or her own identity in relation to the same identity topic that the learner focused on during the communicative language teaching identity. Why I think it's interesting just for us to have a look at some examples of those is that they often, I think, can give you some ideas for further teaching, for further teacher research. So they can spark some ideas, some topics for teacher research. So it's sort of community-based, working with learners in the lesson. Then the teacher reflects on that lesson in relation to his or her own identity, and perhaps coming out of that could be an idea for further teacher research. So I thought I'd show you some activities. I just stopped sharing. Stop sharing that one and share. Mariana, can you see that? Is that all right?
Yeah, it's
Yes,
perfectly fine.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So I'll just show you some examples. So this is part 2 of the book, which has all the activities. So here you can see here a list of the activities. This is not me, like me celebrating birthdays, tweeting, memories and smells, maps of the world, using our brains. This is on reflexing identities, where the learners get to reflect on their own, how they see themselves, reflexing identities, food and identity, so on. And I'll just show you this one activity. So this activity here for the learners is on celebrating birthdays. So in this activity, it's for beginning learners. The different cultures have different ways of celebrating birthdays. So the learners get to write some keywords, and there's a little worksheet about how we celebrate birthdays, my best birthday, and so on. But each activity then has a teacher reflection at the end. And in this one, it says, is there a tradition in your institution or other institutions you have worked in of celebrating teachers' birthdays. In some cultures and institutions, colleagues bring cake to school to celebrate a teacher's birthday, and with morning coffee or afternoon tea, sometimes it is the teacher who brings the cake. What do you think the purpose of such institution-based celebrations might be? What benefits are there for the teacher celebrating the birthday? What benefits are there for other colleagues? Why would some teachers or you prefer not to celebrate their birthdays in the workplace? Do you tell your students when it is your birthday? Why or why not? So just some reflection questions about birthdays, where you get for a moment to think about your own identity as a teacher in relation to, what sort of cultural aspect of your institution, possibly. There could be an interesting research topic there for you and your school. How do we celebrate events in our school? What cultural considerations do we take account of? I want to jump. I'll just show you a couple more if you've got some patience, just to give you an idea. Okay, so this activity, this is a much more advanced activity where students go online and they look for an exhibit in a museum or in an art gallery, and then their activities around the exhibit that they see online. They go to a web page of a museum or art gallery, and there's a whole bunch of activities where they had discussions and they put like a sort of project together. But the teacher reflection here is answer yes or no to the first question, then consider the following statements and note your personal reaction. So how does your reaction relate to your relationships with your students, your relationships with your teacher colleagues, and 3, your classroom practices? So am I immigrant? Yes or no? Because the focus of these exhibitions were on immigrant groups, right? That was the focus of the activity. So immigration and race are very much interconnected. Immigrants' religious practices can be problematic in some host communities in my town or city. Immigrants bring opportunities for learning about new cultural experiences to all in our school. Private schools for immigrants to practice their religions and cultures are acceptable. All immigrants should learn the dominant language of the host country. So those are some yes or no statements that the teacher makes. And then they consider these 3 questions here. So a much more powerful reflection here. But again, relating to the teacher identity, and there may be a potential research topic there. I'll show you one more, just a few pages later. See the interesting diagrams to look at. This is one on identity theft, on how one's identity could be stolen. Nowadays, it's so possible in social media through the various cards we use and online social media platforms and so on. So, students would take part in an activity, they fill in an identity card, and then they look at all the different semiotic resources that we use in our lives to project our identities. And then there's a debate about which of those resources are most powerful, numbers or diagrams or figures and so on. And then the teacher reflection, working in a team in a school or other institution means that your colleagues might often get to see what you do as a teacher, how you plan your lessons, the content of your classes, what you do in your classroom, what assessments you design and use, any professional reading you do, and any action research you might be involved in. How do you feel about your colleagues using some of your ideas? Do you willingly share innovation, successes, and failures with them? Do they share innovation, successes, and failures with you? Do you feel exposed in some way as a teacher when others in your institution know and copy what you are doing? In what ways and why is this problematic for you? Okay, so again, some nice reflective questions to think about who you are, your identity, and how you project your identity in your institutions. Okay, and many more. Just some examples of reflecting on your teacher identity in relation to your learners' activity in relation to their identity. Okay, great. I've been talking far too long, but I've thrown out a whole lot of ideas. I'm happy to take some questions if there are any.
Thank you so very much, Gary, for this very interesting talk. If you have any questions, can you please post them in the chat? And if there are any questions from the Facebook, now let's check the Facebook chat as well. Let's take a look.
I'm just having a look at the chat if anyone puts any questions up here. Any, or not necessarily a question, but any comments? I mean, did anyone, you know, in reflecting on your own life as a teacher, would anyone like to share a story about how something I said, you know, relates to you or does not relate to you? Is something in your context absolutely impossible, and why would that be the case, or does something fit perfectly? What about your identity as a researcher? How do you see yourself? Anyone got a story to share?
Gary, there's a comment on Facebook by Seden Tushan, and I would like to read it to you. It says, uncovering teachers' identities through narrative inquiry make more teachers heard. This is so confirming. Thank you very much, Gary, for the highlights.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, with narrative, of course, we are telling stories. We're sharing our stories. And, you know, teachers tell stories all the time. We share stories. I sit in staff rooms. When I was a high school teacher, we used to share staff room with many teachers, and there'd be stories all the time. And so these stories are there, they're out there. And so as a narrative inquirer, as a language teacher, we have access to these stories, and we can use these stories, and we can tell stories. We can co-construct stories with other teachers and with our learners, of course. We're in the classroom with our learners all the time, who are also telling stories. So stories are in the air. And it's a matter of being a little systematic in order to have a look at those stories and work with them, and just knowing how to work with the story, how to get them, how to work with them, how to interpret them. And it's all about making meaning of those stories, making sense of them in order to understand. So yes, thank you for that comment. You've made my day.
There are some other questions and comments in the chat box, Gary. Would you like to read them? Or would you like any of us to read them for you?
I can have a look.
Perfect. Thank you.
There's a question here. How can we make institutions see the value of teacher research? How can we make institutions see the value of teacher research? Yeah, I mean, that is a very difficult, that's a very difficult question. Because one of the things to do, I guess, is to make it visible, is to cite teacher research. You know, we don't cite teacher research enough, I don't think. We often, when we even doing research, we tend to cite, you know, research that is published in other journals. One of the ways is to cite research that is published in teacher research journals, or cite research that is published in books that have chapters with teacher research. So that certainly makes teacher research more visible. And then as teacher research gets cited more, you know, then it gains the status, I guess, and the visibility that institutions like to see, the impact that institutions like to see. So it's sort of playing the game a little bit, I suppose, in striving for that impact. But I think it's a matter of advocating for research. And if you look at Anna's story that I spoke about I could see her very much being an advocate for teacher research if she finally gets that full-time job in the university. So perhaps we need those advocates within institutions to keep talking about teacher research and the role of teacher research and the importance of teacher research. And in the other presentations of the guest talk so far, that's been a strong message from Emily and Mark and also Kenan. They've been giving that strong message all the time. How we can get, if you have a look at their presentations, they answer that question all the time. So I strongly urge you to have a look at their presentations as well. There's a question, so I'm just looking this way. Could you please tell us a bit about sharing research? This is something that is often questioned by peers in human sciences. Often see our research inferior as a collection of stories lacking rigor. That's a question from Melba Livia. Thank you, Melba. So about sharing research. Well, again, that relates to what I just said as well. I mean, this again, we could do a whole presentation on sharing research and the status of the research that we share. I mean, the first time I went to the Teacher Research Conference in Istanbul, the IETFL Research SIG conference, it was my first time that I had been to a full-on teacher research conference. I was absolutely blown away. You know, we went from one room to another room, another classroom, where the teacher researchers had their posters on the wall and were talking about their research. And we were walking around, looking at the posters, we interacting with the teachers. While the session was on, after the session, there was so much engagement with research. And I'm based in an academic institution, and that's what we need. We need people from the academic institutions to go and see that type of research being done and shared, and the value of that type of research. It was inspirational. I mean, I went back the next year. It was just so wonderful to see that research and how meaningful. I spoke about meaningful research and, you know, the meaningless. That's meaningful research to the lives of those teachers in their own professional practice. Wonderful research. So I think the type, just to get back to the question, you know, please tell us a bit about sharing research. There are now many more opportunities for sharing teacher research, including in your own journal. Melba Livia, you've got a section on teacher research, and it's getting lots of exposure. So you know, there are different outlets. There are now, you know, many professional associations now have a forum, or a platform rather, where teacher research is shared. We have teacher research focused you know, conferences, which are becoming more possible now because of the type of online engagement that we are having. You know, Richard Smith has also, if you go to his webpage, you can see lots of examples. If you go to the IETFL Teacher Research webpage, and lots of examples of how, you know, teacher researchers are sharing their research all over the place and globally as well. So there are lots of examples becoming much more visible. I teach a course on teacher research. This is academic research. It's research methodology for master's students. Now almost half the course is teacher research, because they're all going to be teachers. Maybe one or none are going to become academic researchers. So why do they really need to know about the more, you know, academic, I call it academic research, so SLA type research, when most are going to become teachers in their schools? I'd rather encourage them to learn about teacher research, read other teachers' research, because that's more likely the type of research they're going to be involved in or involved with when they start to practice. So it's that type of sharing through courses, through our teacher education programs that some of us are involved in. Lots of opportunities to share the teacher research there that is now available through all these online forums, through the book, the chapters, through more teacher-friendly journals, and so on. I'll just look at another question, yes? just a nice comment. Sometimes it is difficult to do research in my context because at the time of calling for participation, our colleagues are too busy to share their stories, but we don't give up and become the fly in everyone's ear until we get answers. So that's that advocacy I was talking about. So just not giving up, always striving to do research, and particularly if working with others often helps, not working in isolation. So forming a group, research forum, and these take time. Of course, they take time. But with the sort of commitment I just read in that chat comment, I could see that working. Let me just look at one more here. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. There's a comment here by Ray. He says it would be interesting to have a session on your teacher identity activities, more time and detail. And then there's another question which says, how to involve research in online assessments to ensure more academic integrity?
Online assessment.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question. Online assessment. You mean like online language assessment?
Maybe it just says online assessments. Maybe this participant can clarify it in the chat box or in Facebook.
I don't know if I know much about online assessment, to be honest. Perhaps we'll leave that question. I think it's a little bit out of my scope. I mean, that sounds like, since teachers are involved, that sounds like a good research question. That I mean, I don't know the answers to, but that sounds like a fantastic research topic for that particular teacher. It would just need a bit of reflection and maybe talking to colleagues about, how could we explore this interesting topic? I don't know the answer to it, but that sounds like a very good research topic. Since all of us are now, well, many of us are now involved in online teaching and the assessment, that's such a headache always because, especially language assessment, but also the assessment of content and so on. So that's a really good question, and I think definitely worth exploring.
Great, Gary. There is one more question, I think, asking for suggestions in the chat box.
Any suggestions for those who are new in the field of research?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah. I'm not sure if that person's involved in the actual course that's running, but if not, do it next year because this is a great professional development opportunity that is being put on. There's a number of weeks. It moves at a fast pace, but also at a slow pace in that it gives you time to reflect. There's a lot of activities which you can do through your own time. So look at the professional associations now and see what they are offering in your area. I'm not sure where you're from, but look at the professional associations in your area, see what's been offered. And now professional associations are offering global opportunities like this particular one. And you can take part in some of it or all of it. You can be selective, I guess. I mean, it's nice to do the whole course, I guess, but not everyone has time to do that or the commitment. So, have a look what's out there. You can very easily find these online. You go to Facebook, you can join ITEFL Teacher Research Group. You just have to join. Anyone can do that. And a lot of announcements there. Once you join, you get announcements and lots of announcements on Facebook. If you join Facebook, you also can be involved in online discussions. It's just been a fantastic one that I referred to at the beginning of my talk. I didn't take part in it, but I read every single contributions, fantastic contributions there. It really gets you thinking about research, and many of them have links to courses, to readings, free readings. I see there's a comment here, oh, the articles are not free, with this sad face, and I understand that. But now many of these are free and it's open access available. There's web pages where you can go to get open access material on research, on teacher research. You just need to explore. You know, the associations are really good places to start. And often journal editors will help you as well, or institutional leaders, people working in institutions in teacher education, language teacher education will have links. So you need to be a bit active in exploring. And once you start, then it's hard to stop because there's just so much going on. Yeah, okay, cool. Someone's got some nice photos up there. Good. Anyway, thank you. I think that's all.
Yes, no more questions, Gary.
Okay.
Thank you. Over to you, Ashley.
Thank you so very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Gary, for your comprehensive talk, which was, you know, very interesting. The identity and the reasons for doing research and how it transforms the teachers. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us. Heartfelt thanks also go to our audience as well. In 2 days, we're going to be hosting Anne Burns, and she's going to talk about how to analyze data, suggestions for qualitative and quantitative analysis. And I hope that it is going to be another nice, good, fruitful session. So thanks a lot, and I hope you join us in our next guest talks. Thank you, Gary.